So we are jumping into some early civilizations today. And I'm going to close these blinds over here because it'll make it a little easier for us to see. As we begin chapter 2, our task here is going to be evaluating some of the early civilizations and the way that they established their culture and they established rules for the way that they were going to live. And while we are very good at criticizing the rules that we have to follow, whether they be your parents' rules, whether they be the school rules, whether they be the government's rules, we are not quite as good as at developing our own personal rules and discipline to follow through on those things. And so for some of these people, as they are forming civilizations and they are starting with nothing, they have no rules by which to live. And as certain leaders rise up and begin establishing rules for the different cultures, and they begin telling them, hey, here's the way that we want you to live, and we want you to follow these rules because we have a certain way that we want things done, it becomes more difficult than just sitting down with a piece of paper or an iPad or a set of stone tablets and carving out the rules. Now, God did do that, and He provided 10 commandments for the nation of Israel to follow because they had a hard time figuring this out on their own and creating just and good rules for their civilization to follow and to live by. Do you have a question? No? Okay. So here we are, chapter 2 in early civilizations, and we're going to get into a few of these, starting with Mesopotamia. So looking at the map up on the screen or the one showing up on your computer, what are the two major rivers that flow through Mesopotamia? Tigris and Euphrates. So what do we know about this region of the world? Yes, it's called the Fertile Crescent. And if you don't remember that from geography, I would highlight that or I would put that into your notes somewhere. I don't believe it's going to show up on the screen today. Mesopotamia is known as the Fertile Crescent. Why? It's very fertile. So what does that mean? Good farmland. Yeah. So people can grow crops, and you're going to be able to settle in this area. You have the rivers not only for irrigation, but you also have those rivers for navigation and trade. This is the place you want to be. And this is where many of these early civilizations began. So we're going to begin with the Sumerian civilization, going all the way back to approximately 3000 BC. This is the best date that we have, but this is an approximation. We don't know exactly when their civilization began or when we could even put a time on the timeline and say, well, this was the official beginning, because what we see after the Tower of Babel is a number of groups of people spread throughout the world. They're figuring out their language. There's no written documentation here because they're just learning this new way of speaking. And so over the course of the next few hundred, maybe even 1,000 years, they are developing their own way of life, their own rules, their own ways to survive. And so we say approximately 3000 BC is where the Sumerian civilization begins, and we need to understand a few characteristics about them. Sumer was a place of several city-states together. Now, can anybody tell me what is a city-state? What does that mean, Forrest?
It's a form of government where there's different cities that each is basically independent.
Okay.
But they're all part of the same nation.
Okay. So I think you hit on a couple of key things here. They're individual cities that team together when necessary, but they really don't work well together on a regular basis. So they work almost as independent nations in and of themselves. And so when we look at Sumer, we're not talking about a country here. We're not talking about a nation. We're just talking about a bunch of different city-states that popped up in the Mesopotamia region, and they happen to have some similar characteristics involved there. Their main form of religion was polytheism. Most of these city-states did not get along. A lot of that was due to the fact they worshiped different gods. they had different rules. They had different ideas about how the world should work. And so they really didn't get along very well together. What is polytheism? Matt? Yeah, you have many gods. So there's not just one god they're worshiping many different gods. And we don't know a lot about the individual gods, but we do know based off of some of the artifacts that have been collected that they had many gods they worshipped. And it was a central part of their culture. What was the earliest type of writing that we know about? Cuneiform, yeah, there it is. So cuneiform, most of you heard about that when you were either reading through the chapter or perhaps even back when you were studying this in a previous class. And so we have figured out some of the writing, but most of it was done on clay tablets. We've been able to translate some of it based off of other languages as well. I cannot translate that for you. I have no idea what that says. For all I know, that could be somebody's junior, senior invite right there. But we do know that they used clay tablets. They did not have paper. They had school fathers and school sons as part of their civilization. This was their educational system. And so if you were in a Sumerian culture, a city-state here, you would call me your school father. Please don't. We're not going there. And you would be my school sons. Ladies, you'd be free to leave. Most women were not allowed to be educated in the Sumerian civilization. So while that may be a relief to you, that means, hey, no homework tonight. That also means that you have some disadvantages in the society because of that. That also means you can't read, that means you can't write. Women were not held in high regard in that society. So most of the people that lived in this region, I'm going the wrong direction here, aren't I? Yep. Most people who lived in this region were farmers. That was their main way of life. Of course, living between the Tigris and Euphrates River, that makes a lot of sense. And so people relied upon the crops, they relied upon the irrigation that they had dug out from those two rivers in order to be able to survive. And then they would use what they farmed in order to trade with other city-states. Perhaps one of the best known pieces of architecture is the ziggurat. What does that remind you of, or what do you think the purpose of that may have been? What do you think? Temple. Does look like a temple. Any other thoughts come to mind as you see that picture there on the bottom right of the screen? A palace. Good. Kind of like a pyramid, yeah. We give the Egyptians credit for creating the pyramids, but yet the Mesopotamian civilizations, they had similar structures, perhaps maybe not quite as difficult to design and build as the pyramids, but very impressive nonetheless. So perhaps it was a palace, perhaps it was a place of worship, and most historians agree it was probably a mixture of both. Maybe even a seat of government for laws to be made there. But please associate ziggurats with the Sumerian civilization. And I will give you a little bit of a heads up to future learning experiences that you will have certain questions that will ask you which civilization would you find a ziggurat? And you have to identify, is it Sumer, is it Egypt, is it Rome, is it the United States? Where did that come from? Same thing, cuneiform would be another one to make sure that you associate there with Sumer. Sargon I is perhaps one of the best known of all the leaders from this time period. I think your book has a different name that they use for him, Sargon of, what did they say? Akkad, same guy, Sargon I, Sargon of Akkad. So he built the first empire in this area somewhere around 2350 BC. that was a really important event because he was able to unify all these people that disagreed and did not often get along. So he was a military conqueror, and he went around to city-state after city-state, conquering and overthrowing their governments and taking over. And so if I'm Sargon over here, I'm going to start over here in this section. I'm going to take over your city-state. Now I rule over you guys. Then I'm going to move on, and I'm going to take my army, and I'm going to recruit a few more from you. We're going to take over this section. And now I'm going to recruit even more people, and we're going to go over here, and we're going to conquer all of this territory. And that's what Sargon did, piece by piece, city-state by city-state. And he ends up becoming the first known emperor, building up this empire in the area of Mesopotamia. And as he gained so much power in the region, the people in the surrounding areas began to look at Sargon almost like a god, because nobody could defeat him, nobody could stop him, and he was so powerful that they started wondering, is he more than just a human? Of course, he was human. He is going to die. His empire is going to fall apart. And it's about 250 years after Sargon I is when we see in the Bible, Abraham is told to get up out of this land and to move because of the polytheism, because of the idolatry that's going on in this region. There is a lot of speculation that Abraham did live under the rule and leadership of Sargon I, as we read about his account in Genesis chapter 12. Now, some of the contributions of their society. Cuneiform is passed along to other civilizations. Other groups of people use this form of writing. It was not only unique here, but they're the ones that created it, and they're best known for cuneiform. Much of their architecture is borrowed and used then by the Romans, which is then passed along to many other cultures moving forward. In fact, the United States borrowed a lot of Roman architecture when we started building many of our structures. And that spread throughout a lot of the world, so a lot of it goes back here to Sumerians. They're credited with the invention of the wheel. So that's not just in cartoons. There actually was a time where somebody came up with the idea of let's make a wheel. It's credited to them. They also figured out there are 360 degrees in a circle. I don't know if they knew pi r squared or not, but they were able to figure out the circle. And division of time into 60 units was also something that they had figured out as well. One of the themes that I want you to notice and I want you to see as we go through these civilizations, these empires, is that there's generally a beginning, a rise to power, a time of prosperity. We call it the Golden Age, where life is good, people are thriving, they're powerful, and then it declines, and it falls. Every empire through history has gone through that rise, period of peak, and life is good, and then decline. So where's the United States right now? Are we on the rise, peak, or decline? Yeah, some would say decline. Some would say we're at the peak. Those that are optimistic would say we're still on the rise. There's higher we can go. It kind of depends on your perspective, and it depends on your outlook on where you think the United States has the potential to go.
We're going to take over Canada.
Now, yeah, maybe. I don't see that happening. We'll come back. We'll make more parallels to the United States moving forward. Sumerians here, the end of their civilization was as they were conquered by other nations. And we don't have documentation to prove this. This is just the artifacts telling the story for us. But we have to assume that as time progressed, their power eventually fell into the hands of other groups that came in to conquer them, and they were carried away or they were assimilated into those cultures. What does that term assimilate mean? Force? Good. You adapt, you become part of, you merge with, And that's a term you're going to see quite often. So if that's one that's new to you or not familiar to you, write out a quick definition. It means that you're going to become a part of another civilization, and no longer are you going to have your own unique characteristics that define who you are. I mentioned Abraham a moment ago, and Abraham from the Bible we can trace back again in Genesis. I'm going to read a short passage for you in a few moments, but we know that he was born in Ur. Genesis tells us this, and Ur was part of Mesopotamia. So he would have most likely been under the leadership and the reign of Sargon I, enduring the idolatry and the polytheism that was part of that culture. And God said, get up and leave this land of many gods and go to a land that I promised you, I preserve for you, that land of Canaan. Now, where's Canaan located? Modern-day Israel, along the banks of the, what body of water? Well, it's across the Jordan River from Mesopotamia, Mediterranean Sea. Yeah, so this is where he told Abraham, get up, leave, go over to Canaan, the land I promised you. And we also see him interacting with the Egyptians during the Egyptian Middle Kingdom. Now, that's probably not going to mean a whole lot to you right now. When we get into Egypt, that will. So in Genesis chapter 12, the Bible says, now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, will bless you, and make your name great, so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So Abraham went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, which is where he was living at the time, still part of Mesopotamia. Abraham took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Abraham passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there to the mount east of Bethel. He pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abraham journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. What is the Negev? It's a desert. It's there in Israel. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came about, when he came near to Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, see now, I know that you're a beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me. But they will let you live. So please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you. So it came about when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman was very beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Therefore he treated Abram well for her sake, gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys, male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here's your wife, take her and go. Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where the altar which he had made there formerly. And when Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now, as we look at his story here, we see him being forced out of the land because of the idolatry and because of the harsh rule of Sargon. He moves, goes down to where God promised him the land of Canaan. There was a famine in the land of Canaan, And then he moves on to Egypt, knowing that Egypt had the Nile River. It had an abundance of crops. It had availability of food stored up there. And that's where he meets up with Pharaoh. Now, we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more after lunch today. But we'll pause there for right now.